Howdy folks, and welcome to the Hillbilly Kitchen. Today we are making an absolute epic sourdough biscuit. Now these are the best biscuit I think I have ever eaten, and they are the closest to the biscuits my granny used to make that I have eaten since she made biscuits. And what makes them so good is active sourdough starter. Now granny used fresh cultured buttermilk, and I don't have any unpasteurized milk and I don't have access to it. But this does the same thing that her fresh buttermilk did. So here's what we need. We need 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and because we're not letting these rise overnight, we're doing biscuits and we want them quick, we're going to add 2 teaspoons of baking powder, about 3/4 teaspoons of baking soda, and a teaspoon of salt to them. Now if you've got self-rising flour, you can omit this and just use 2 cups of self-rising flour. I've got a 1/2 cup of butter. You can use butter, you can use lard, you can use Crisco, whatever you want to use, but you need a 1/2 cup of fat. I've got a 1/2 cup of regular milk. You could use buttermilk or something else. And I'm going to use 1 cup of my sourdough starter. And this is active. I've seen folks use the discard, and you can use the discard, but the active is going to make them super light and flaky. And they are just going to be absolutely delicious. And I'm going to add a little bit of honey in mine, a teaspoon or so. You can also use a little sugar if you wanted to. You could use a little molasses or something like that. But you're going to want to sweeten them a little bit because there's sourdough starter in them. So I'm going to go ahead and dump this stuff, the leavening, into my flour. And I'm going to give it a little whisk. And then I want to cut my butter in. And I've seen folks freeze their butter and grate it and all that nonsense. I do not do that. I never saw my granny do that. If you want to freeze it and grate it, you be my guest. That's just way more work than I want to do. But you want to cut your fat in until it's like sandy. And you can sift your flour if you want to. I just give it a little whisk to put a little air in it. Granny did always sift her flour, and it does make your biscuits fluffier. So if you want to take the time to sift it, by all means do that. Now this step here where you're cutting your fat into your flour, I said whatever kind of fat you want to use. Different types of fat do change the texture of your biscuits a little bit. But what really changes the texture of your biscuits is how well you do this step. And then how gentle you are with the mixing and the folding. Because after this step, you don't want to spend a whole lot of time working your biscuit dough. But this step, you want to get that fat really cut in there. You want your biscuit mix to be really fine. That, like I said, you want it sandy. You want all the fat well combined with the flour. And you can do this with pastry blades and stuff. And like I said, lots of folks freeze it. I don't understand that. I like to use my wire whisk and my hands. I cut it in pretty good with my whisk. And then I take my hands and just twist it like this until I get it super well combined. And then I whisk it again just a little bit to put some air back in it. Because when you do this, it kind of tends to, I don't know, it makes big lumps. And you don't want big lumps, you want it like sand. So take your time with this step. And get that as fine as you can. Because that's the secret right there. Alright, that looks pretty good. Okay, now I'm going to get me out a cup of my sourdough starter and combine that with my 1/2 cup of milk. And this is active. You can see the bubbles in it. You want it active. Like I said, I've seen folks do it with the discard, but it's going to be much better if it's active. And you might have to adjust the milk in these a little bit. It just depends on how much moisture is in your sourdough starter. Mine was pretty runny, so I'm guessing this is going to come out pretty good. But you can see all them bubbles on that spoon. That's what you want. You want it bubbly. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my honey in, and I'm going to go ahead and add it into my flour. And I'm not going to measure it. Like I said, about a teaspoon or so. Maybe a little more. Got a lot of sourdough starter in there. A little more. And no, I don't usually buy honey in jars this small. All right. We'll give that just a little bit of a stir. And we'll give this just a little bit of a stir. And then we're going to add the two together. And like I said, if you've got self-rising flour, it will work just fine. Just omit the salt and the baking powder and the baking soda. You're still going to want the honey, I think. Now we just want to fold this here together good and get it pretty well combined. We don't want to overwork it once we add the liquid into the flour. If you do that, your biscuits will be very hard and very flat. You're going to need a little bit more flour, and my dough is pretty wet, so I want to make sure I got enough here. And you just want to fold it out. You can use a rolling pin if you want to. I don't. I normally just use my hands to press them out. And my granny used to shape the biscuits with her hands. She did not use a biscuit cutter. She would just pinch off a little dough and shape the biscuit. I usually do use a biscuit cutter because I can't get them even when I do that. And I can't get them smooth. She had them perfectly smooth every time. Every biscuit was the same size and every biscuit was perfectly smooth. Now, we're just going to fold these a couple of times. Like I said, this dough here is extremely wet. If your dough is extremely wet, put a little extra flour on your board and it'll soak in as you fold the dough and it'll take that up. If it's dry, you're not going to need as much flour. And part of making good biscuits is learning what the dough's supposed to feel like. You can see that's some sticky dough. We don't want it quite that sticky. So I'm going to fold it one more time here. Dust it pretty good. There we go. That's getting better. Oh, and this is such a light dough. These are going to be delicious. Get some flour out here. Every time I fold this sticky dough, it's going to put a layer in my biscuits. So if you like layers, you're going to want to fold it a few times. If layered biscuits are kind of your thing, fold it a couple of times, and that's how you're going to get the layers in there. And if layers are your thing, make the dough a little bit sticky so you can fold it a few times. All right. There we go. Now that's better. It's not sticky. It's all over my hands, but it's not sticking to my hands anymore, and that's what we want. And we're just going to cut them. And you can see the layers in there where I folded it. And I put them in my pan with the edges touching. Now something else I did too is I put a little bit of flour in the bottom of my pan. That's going to keep them from sticking to my pan, and it's also going to make my pan a little bit easier to clean up. And I'm all about a little bit easier to clean up. And it don't have to be much easier to clean up for me to do it. You want to press straight down on your biscuit cutter too. Don't twist it, just press it. When my kids were growing up, I didn't have a fancy biscuit cutter. I always used a soup can. And when my kids were growing up, I also made much smaller biscuits. Because when you got to feed 4 kids, you're not making biscuits as big as these. You're making little bitty biscuits. All right, now we're not going to throw away our extra biscuit dough. I have seen folks do that. You don't want to overwork it. You definitely don't. But you can stick it back together, fold it a couple of times, and it will be fine. And it will be as good as the other biscuits, and it will rise up and all that fun stuff. Because we'll get 2 or 3 more biscuits out of this. And you are not going to want to throw away 2 or 3 of these biscuits, I promise. Now, I've said this with quick dough or quick breads before. Anytime we do quick breads, let them rest just a minute. And I've heard people say, oh gosh, don't do that. But let them rest for just a minute. So once you get your biscuits in the pan while you're cooking whatever else, if you're making them for Sunday dinner, you know, you can make them while you're finishing up dinner there. But if you're making breakfast while you're cooking the sausage and the gravy and stuff, let your oven preheat and let your biscuits sit there while the oven is preheating. And by the time your oven gets preheated, which will take, you know, 4 or 5 minutes, depending on your oven, then you can put your biscuits in the oven and they will be good and rested. But like I said, give them just a few minutes to sit there and rest before you put them in the oven. Now we're going to preheat the oven to 415 degrees. Depending on your oven, you can go a little hotter, and I've seen biscuit recipes go up to 450, and I've seen people do biscuits at like 400. But my rule of thumb generally with biscuits is 415 for 15 minutes. That makes it easy to remember. And I know 415 is an odd number, but you're going to cook them for 15 minutes. And if a biscuit recipe says 400, or, you know, it's not going to matter if you cook it at 415. And if it says 450, they'll cook it 415. It just might take them a little bit longer. So all my biscuits I do at 415 for 15 minutes. It just makes it easy to remember. So I'm going to get the oven preheated and wash my hands off, because that was a sticky dough. And like I said, if it's sticky, you want more flour on your board. If it's not sticky, you want less flour on your board. If it's too dense, your biscuits will also be dense. So it's better if when you're mixing it up, your dough is a little bit wet and a little bit sticky before you fold it out. That way your biscuits are a little bit lighter, because it's very hard to get flour out of biscuits once you put it in there. Now you can add a little more milk or whatever if you want to, but it's easier if you just use a little less flour in the beginning and then work it in when you're folding them over a few times. You don't want to knead them like you do bread. Just fold them over and mash them out a little bit. That's all you want to do. Don't overwork them. It makes them tough and it'll keep them from rising. But that little bit of dough that we had left that we put in the center, you'll see how pretty that biscuit is. It'll rise up just like all the rest of them. So don't throw that dough away. Don't waste it. We'll be back here in just a minute. We're going to put these in our 415 degree oven for 15 minutes, and then I'll show you what they look like. They're going to be great. They're going to be great, big, huge, like tall, fluffy biscuits. While our biscuits are finishing up, I want to take just a minute to talk to you about forgiveness. Colossians 3:13 says, "Forbearing one another and forgiving one another, if any man hath quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye." Now there's lots and lots and lots of stuff in the Bible about forgiveness. Jesus even told us, if we do not forgive, our Father which is in heaven will not forgive us. So if you're feeling separated from God and you're mad at somebody, you need to take that to the Lord and you need to give it to Him, and you need to let go of it, and you need to forgive that person, because unforgiveness separates us from God. And the Bible tells us that over and over and over again. And unforgiveness also causes physical problems. It causes us to be sick. It causes emotional problems. It separates us from our friends. It separates us from our family. It causes loneliness, which leads to all sorts of other problems. It literally can make us physically and emotionally and mentally sick, not forgiving. And it takes people out of our life and isolates us. And that just is not healthy for anybody. It destroys families. It destroys friendships. It destroys church families. It destroys communities. And quite frankly, it's destroying our entire country. And the truth about holding grudges and having a quarrel against somebody is that most of the time we don't even remember what we're mad about. We're just mad, and we just hang on to that anger. We hang on to that hurt. A lot of times we're hurt over things that didn't even really happen. We interpreted the way somebody said something or the way somebody did something in the wrong way, and we hold it against them, and they didn't mean it that way at all. And it can, you know, like I said, it can remove people that we deeply, deeply love from our lives and just destroys those relationships. And it definitely destroys our relationship with the Lord. Jesus said, forgive, and your Father will forgive you. We are supposed to forgive like Christ forgave us, and we are supposed to love like Christ loved us. And we cannot love like Christ loved us unless we are forgiven like Christ forgave us. There is nothing more important in the life of a Christian than forgiveness, because forgiveness is what saves us. Christ forgiving us of our sins and us believing it is what saves us. But we have to also then forgive, because he tells us that. He expects that of us. And I'm not getting in any kind of theological thing here. If you don't believe what I'm saying, read the Bible and pray about it. Christ expects you to forgive the way that he forgave you. This verse tells us, even as Christ forgave you, so do ye. Forgive it, no matter how bad it is, because there's nothing Christ won't forgive, so there's nothing that we shouldn't forgive. And especially those petty little things that are misunderstandings and that we don't remember anyway. Unforgiveness destroys your happiness, it destroys your health, and it destroys your relationships with people and with the Lord. So whatever it is, let go of it and truly start living in that peace and that freedom that the Bible promises us that Christ is offering you. It's all about forgiveness. Forgive as Christ forgave you. It helps, it works, and it gives you true peace and true joy. And you'll be healthier and you'll feel better. Oh my goodness. Did I tell you that these were going to be epic? They are epic. They are huge, light, fluffy, fat biscuits. And I'm going to put just a little bit of butter on the top of them because it makes the crust pretty. If you don't like that, don't do it. It will make them a little bit softer on the top. So if you like that little crunchy top on it, don't do this, because this is going to make it a little softer on the top. These are perfect for Sunday dinner, if you want some biscuits to go with Sunday dinner. They are good with a big pan of sausage gravy, or you can make some great big breakfast sandwiches out of these. Make a pan full on the weekend maybe, and you've got enough for breakfast sandwiches all week. Some sausage, egg, and cheese, bacon, egg, and cheese, or whatever else you like to go on them. Way yonder better than any fast food biscuit you're going to get. Way yonder better. You can maybe enjoy them with some homemade apple butter on them, or some strawberry jam or blackberry jam. It's blackberry season now. Folks are making blackberry jam and cobblers and stuff right now. See if I can get one out here. They're super, super hot, but they ought to, yeah, they're coming out. If you give them about 3 or 4 minutes, they'll come out a little bit better, but you do want to eat them while they're hot. And if you feed your sourdough starter at night, right before you go to bed, it will be ready to make biscuits with in the morning. And you don't have to worry about what in the world to do with all that sourdough discard, because you're putting it in your biscuits and you're not doing, you know, you're using it. If you take a cup out every day, feed it at night before you go to bed, and then take a cup out in the morning to make your biscuits, and it's, you know, you don't have to worry about, like I said, what to do with it. But you can see how fluffy. These are flaky, and they are just so good. Another way to enjoy them, which is how I used to eat biscuits. Well, if Granny had fresh jam, I'd put fresh jam on them. But just a little butter and honey. There is nothing better than a fresh, hot, fluffy biscuit with some butter and honey on it. Oh my goodness. And these are the best biscuits. They just have a wonderful flavor. The texture is super light, super fluffy, super flaky. I mean, they're just delicious. So if you have sourdough starter or a sourdough that you're keeping, definitely use some of it in some biscuits. If you don't have it, I'll put a link in here where you can order some dehydrated stuff. And we've got some other sourdough videos. I'll link those in the description or maybe in end cards or something. But I will definitely give you information on how you can get started with sourdough. But if you don't use it for anything other than biscuits, these are good and they're worth the effort to feed your sourdough the starter and keep it alive. They really are that good. I want to thank y'all so much for joining us in the Hillbilly Kitchen. If you haven't already, please don't forget to click like and subscribe before you leave. Hang on to this recipe, give it a try, share it with your friends. If you don't already have sourdough starter, I'll have some information in the description of this video so you can get started, and we have up some other videos on it. Until next time, remember to put God first and forgive each other as Christ forgave you.